Hello, if you don't know me, my name is Sean. I'm recording this video in order to make a video about my journey with chess. I'm someone who's a chess player in the Toronto, Ontario, Canada region, and what I'm going to be doing here is basically just to start going over some of my classical chess games that I'm playing at the moment, and hopefully over time I get to mention the context and situation that I'm trying to engage with in terms of my chess, and I'm able to share my journey with classical chess as I'm currently right now someone who's trying to get a national master title in my chess journey. So with this video I'm just going to be going over my first game of a recent classical chess tournament I played, and this was in Markham, Ontario. And what this tournament is about is a classical chess tournament of 6 rounds that took place over 3 days, and I'm going to be go over each classical game. And for context, my rating is 2196 Chess CFC, Chess Federation of Canada, but I am 1820 FIDE rated, and these are both my classical ratings. And my main goal is to get a national master title, which requires 3 tournament norms of 2300. If you don't know what that is, it is where in a tournament you have to play 5 or more games and perform at a level that is considered 2300 or more. So I'm just going to jump right into this. I played with the black pieces in my first game, and because it's the first game, the pairings were able to come out a bit early, and I was trying to do a bit of preparation for my opponent and what they wanted to play. I saw that my opponent, who's rated 1920, was someone who liked to play the closed Sicilian, particularly the Grand Prix. And this comes with these moves: e4, c5, knight c3, and then it could be knight c6, could be d6, but a later f4. And this is reflective of a particular style where white wants a relatively closed position in the center and to be able to launch a king-side attack in the middle game. And this is something that, while at the very top level in Grandmaster play, this is probably viewed as not fighting for a real advantage. Even at levels such as FIDE Master or International Master, this can be used as a weapon if black is unfamiliar or doesn't have a lot of experience. And I'm familiar with a bit of the plans of the Grand Prix, both because it's something I've played a little bit, I guess, in Online Blitz, for example, but it's a very common opening at the even earlier beginner levels, and I do have a lot of experience playing against it. And usually the plans are to have knight f3, maybe bishop fianchettoing, castling, queen e1 to h4, and launching a king-side attack, and actually not really developing this bishop, and being able to keep the rook here with a4, and maybe even translocate it to the king side. And I'm kind of happy to see this opening because I did prep a little bit against the Grand Prix, and I don't usually start with knight c6 because after knight c6 there could be a transposition to the Rosslimo. Sometimes an opponent might fake a particular move order or opening that you're expecting, and then go for a particular move order to provoke certain moves like knight c6, and then transpose to an opening that they've actually prepared for, and that I'm not prepared for because I don't play into the Rosslimo. I play other Sicilian openings. So because of that, I actually started with a6, which is a very common move in all types of Sicilians because there's always that queenside pawn expansion with b5, and it's just a useful move in preparing that, and also preventing anything from coming to b5 if I were to play knight c6. So that eliminates those variations, and it's relatively non-committal because I'm going to play that move no matter what. And I just also wait and see if my opponent is actually going to commit to the Grand Prix. And my opponent plays a4 to prevent a future b5, and now I play e6 because, again, I actually don't think that knight c6 is necessary at the moment. Again, in positions where the knight has come to c3, usually in opposition to that, I prepare a pawn advance in the middle with d5, because the problem is whenever you have your knight on c3, it's harder to prevent d5, And the reason is because the c pawn can't come to c4. And in other types of Sicilians, if there's like a Sicilian Khan, an e6 Sicilian, there are variations in which white can get a stranglehold on the d5 square. And that happens when the pawn is able to go to c4. And I don't play into this type of opening in the Sicilian. And I'm not really interested in playing against it because it's relatively solid for white. But once the knight has committed to c3, e6 is possible because d5 isn't really preventable. And in the previous position, if the pawn does go to d5 and there's c takes d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, it results in a relatively slower level of development for black, and white can actually gain a bit of an initiative. So e6 is actually better in closed, is almost a necessary move in closed Sicilians, but the reason I didn't play it on even here is because there is still the potential for going to the open Sicilian, and I don't want to go to open Sicilians with e6. But this signals, when I see a4 from my opponent, even though there's still that possibility of going knight f3, a4 is not a move you combine in open Sicilians against e6. Like, that doesn't happen. So I know he's going for the Grand Prix, and he actually surprised me with bishop c4, because in these types of closed positions, the bishop going to c4 is not the right placement for the bishop. Because e6 already has been played and is preparing d5, d5 is actually still not preventable, even though bishop c4 temporarily controls d5. And what's even more is that when I play d5, I'm going to gain a tempo and push the bishop back and be able to have a better central pawn structure than him. I'll be able to have better central control. And this is why bishop doesn't go to c4 in these types of close Sicilian structures with e6. What's usually happens is that there's pawn to g3 and then bishop g2, where it's relatively safe on the diagonal, and it's a good defender of the king, and allows white to be able to keep as many pieces away from the center and queen side, where black will expand, and actually just focus all of the pieces towards the king side, where white wants to do an attack. But this doesn't help. Bishop c4 does not help white. And I play knight c6 because I know that he's not going to commit to playing d4 at all, or he's not going to commit to playing d4 anymore because he's wasted too many moves. And he goes into f4. I play knight e7, preparing d5, knight f3, d5 takes, and I take with the knight. Now this is actually an important position to think about, because usually the general rule is to recapture with the pawn, and this is one of the moves. But what I was thinking about knight takes d5 is that he's forced to take back with his knight, and I recapture with the pawn and to gain a tempo on the bishop. And the reason why I think it's forced is because if he, which is what he did in the game, plays pawn to d3, I get to double his pawns with knight takes c3. But the problem is, and this is something that the engine had pointed out, and by saying this is not the best move, is that I overestimate the weakness of such doubled pawns, because there is the d3 pawn to help lessen the effect of the static weakness of the doubled c pawns. As well, whenever there is this type of capture, there's always a b file that opens up for the rook where white can gain activity. And it's actually not so simple in seeing this as a weakness, but rather, even if there's some static compromise with the pawn structure, there's that dynamic compensation that white has in terms of piece activity down the b file. So I think I overestimate the weakness of doubled pawns in this position, and because of that, that makes it less of a reason for me to capture with the knight, because what I was thinking is that he cannot let me take like the knight, but yeah, it's actually possible. And because of that, now I'm faced with a situation where I've left my pawn on e6, and it hampers the development of my bishop. And what's even more is that now I have to spend extra moves developing my bishop here, and my b pawn will be weak after I capture with the knight. And this b pawn will be a weakness, and I won't be able to push it to b5. So what I should have done is capture with the pawn. Now, what I was thinking was wrong with this is that for some reason this knight is not well positioned. I thought that maybe the rook after castling could get in time and pin, and this pawn would be pressured. But that's simply not the case. If I just simply calculate, pawn takes, bishop goes back to a2, g6, castles, bishop g7, rook e1, I castle in time, and I'm still able to protect the pawn. If he ever tries to sack, I can recapture with the knight and maintain my defense of my d5 pawn. And I'm just better. The engine says I'm -1, and the reason is because I have great central control, my pieces are very well developed, my knight is behind the c-pawn while his knight blocks his own c-pawn. It's really hard for white to have any control and breaks with his pawns. Meanwhile, I have that advantage. I have the ability to control that, to be able to advance my pawn to d4 or c4 and maybe even b5. And I'll actually just show this position. After takes, let me show this position. I have the pawn mobility, and I have the future middle game plans that are more easily achievable while he's a bit cramped. So it was inadvisable for me to take with a knight, but we go on. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop d6. Here I was considering bishop d6 or bishop e7, but I thought this was a bit more active in controlling e5 and pressuring f4. He castled, I castled, and now there's a very important maneuver here which is actually very interesting to me and I hadn't considered in the middle game. I thought after bishop d6 castles, he was going to develop with the queen to e1 and maybe to g3, bishop d2, rook b1, and I thought maybe he would just support the knight going to e5. That would be the plan here, because if I ever capture, let's say I play queen c7 to control, let's say there's bishop, let's say rook b1, b6, it turns out it's actually not so simple to get to e5, but if in a hypothetical situation my opponent would be able to, there would be this recapture with the f-pawn to go to e5, which would open up the rook, gain some kingside space, and being able to launch an attack on me. But in actuality, I can battle my opponent against it, and because of that, e5 is not a square that white plans to move the knight to, but another square in the center they can move to is e4, and that's what knight g5 accomplishes. It reroutes the knight to e4 to be able to put pressure on my position and also allow the rook to support a future f-pawn advance, and I really appreciated this from my opponent. In addition, it threatens queen h5 to be able to put direct pressure on my king and threaten checkmate. So I immediately played h6. I didn't want any possibility of sacrifices of an attack on my king. Played knight e4. And now here I had a dilemma. Do I preserve my bishop pair with a move like bishop e7 or bishop c7? Well, not bishop c7, but bishop e7. But I didn't like this because now he's done an improvement to his position while I'm still lagging behind in development, and there's already a real possibility of an attack, of a devastating attack, being launched against my king with g4, g5, and the bishops being well placed to put pressure, and everything just working here. At different moments in time, there's balancing. You have to balance different things in a game. There's balancing the dynamics of the position involving pieces and the imbalance in pieces, such as bishop pair versus no bishop pair. The other is static weaknesses, like having a better pawn structure versus not. But then there's development, and I'm currently lagging behind in development, and I see that I don't think I can afford to be able to just move this bishop back, because this is going to be a devastating attack on my king. So I play b6 because I need to develop my bishop, and I'm okay with him taking because I will recapture and develop with my queen. But then we get rook b1 as planned, and I have to defend this pawn by moving the knight. I considered moving to e7, but I thought that it was, again, I'm not gaining tempo in this position, and I really believe I need to compensate for the fact that I don't have a bishop pair with development and an initiative. So I play knight a5. he goes back to a2, and I play bishop b7. I fully connected my rooks, so I think I could be able to counter my opponent's attacks and pressure with the fact that I have a developed position. We see f5, and I have to take here. If I don't, this pawn will go to f6, or even take and open up my king. So I take, he goes here, and I have, I believe, two moves in this position. It is either rook ae8 or queen g6. Queen g6, what it does is pressures the rook and the pawn because of the bishop, but rook ae8 is a better move. And the reason it's a better move is because I don't have to play this move right away. I can wait to see what my opponent does, but rook ae8 is going to be played no matter what, because this is an open e-file, and my other rook needs to stay protecting f7. But it's not that big of a deal. I play queen g6. The engine says black is slightly better, but after here it's completely equal. But again, it doesn't mean it's an easy position. There's a huge imbalance, and there could be many opportunities for both sides to make a mistake. So we see queen f1, which is a move I didn't like, because the queen, and this is what I actually thought here was not good, this queen actually should have gone to h5. He doesn't need to rush to recapture this pawn right away, because I won't be able to defend it. If I play g6, well, this pawn is weak, and he can take it. If I play queen g6, he can take, and there's this pin. If I try to play bishop c8, well, I'm just undeveloping my bishop, and my rooks are not coordinated. It's going to be hard for me to develop. Moves like bishop f4, and then bringing even the rook are going to be important, maybe just right away. So I think I wouldn't want to defend the pawn. I would want to continue developing, and then he can't take with the rook because of a check, so he would take like this, and then some type of queen e7 or rook e7 to follow. But he takes with the pawn with the rook, which is totally fine. Queen f1, and here's a very important tactical moment, and I analyzed this with the engine after. I seriously considered bishop takes g2, but the position is actually still 0-0. Right here it's 0-0. There's two moves to keep it 0-0. There's what I played, rook a8, and then bishop takes g2. Why is bishop takes g2 an important move here? Because, well, if my opponent takes, I win the exchange. But the problem is that it's not so simple, because my opponent has, and I calculate this, bishop takes h6. I would play either queen h7 or queen f6. He would be able to go back here, and if I go queen g6, it's not so simple. It's not so simple because I think even here, after queen f6, I believe there is this move, rook takes b6. Rook takes b6, and if I take, there's mate. So I actually considered queen h7. This was the move I considered. And then bishop f4. And now my rook is, my pawn is under attack, and these bishops are about to pressure my entire position. So I was thinking of sacrificing the exchange back, and then going out with my queen, and we'll first try and get my knight reactivated and make sure that I would be able to, again, defend the attack, but also try and prove that I'm better because of my better pawn structure. And if I don't give back the exchange, then, well, after queen at h4, there's bishop c7, and I'm going to lose this pawn. And if I try and take this pawn on a4, because that's what queen h4 does, skewers, then there's bishop d5. And I have white has massive pressure on my position. Rook c8, and now looks like there's like a lot of pressure here. Rook may be coming here with the support of queen f1, and it's a bit difficult for me to maneuver to be comfortable here, because white is just gaining a lot of activity and messing up my pawn structure. And the engine proved me right, that this wasn't a move that was better than the one that I played, which was rook a8. And I think, and this is actually a slightly better move according to the engine, because what this move does is lets white choose what move they want to make. Because the problem with a forcing move like bishop takes g2 is that it's very obvious what to play for white. and you're not giving your opponent chances to make a mistake. And this is really important in middle games. You want to give your opponent many choices to be able to think, waste time on, and if they're unsure, they maybe make the worst decision. Now here, after rook a8, what I'm doing here is I'm controlling the e-file, and I was planning to double up like this while defending f7 to just double up my rooks and maybe go to e2. And there's also a tactical threat that I'm offering here in the position, and that is, if you want to find it on your own, you can pause, but the tactical move here is rook e1, and this pins the queen, sacrificing the rook. And let's just say a random move, if my opponent takes, I have checkmate. So it offers a tactical threat, maintains the pressure on g2, and gives white many options in a difficult position to navigate. Now my opponent here blunders, not because it's, oh, he played rook takes b6, but he thought, not that, oh, he didn't see that I could take back, but he thought he had a tactic here, where after rook takes b6, queen takes b6, he has rook takes f7, and he will be able to have a discovered check with the bishop to be able to attack and win material back. But the problem is, I have a forcing move here on my part, and my opponent didn't see that, and this was basically costing the game, and it was pawn to c4. Pawn to c4 blocks the diagonal, very important move, and gives a check. This is a very, very good move for me, and even if it wasn't check, if the king was on h1, like if we had a position where the king was on h1, and I play c4, after rook takes f7, c4, king is on h1, and he still takes, I still have the rook for 2 pawns. He still just only won 2 pawns, and there's no real progress being made. So even without the check, even if he spent an extra tempo preparing it, this is not the right move. The best move in the position is rook f2 to just defend, removing the threat of rook e1 and the threat of bishop takes g2. And I probably would have just, again, rook e7 and prepare. But again, I think I was able to succeed in giving my opponent options and making sure that I stayed solid. Yes, I did have the knight on the rim, which is dim and wasn't very active, but I think what was positive was that in an equal and complicated position, I'm not making any committal, irreversible moves. I give my opponent options, and I put pressure, and I don't try and cash in early. And I think that led to my opponent kind of bailing out, in the sense that he felt tension in the position and didn't like it and wanted it to be resolved quickly, but he needed to play rook f2. This is the only move in the position. The other one is bishop d2, but it's minus 0.7 after that, which is still obviously playable, but rook f2 is a much clearer, better move there that protects the equality of the position. And I think I'm happy with this game in the sense that middle game, I navigated middle game tension properly, and I remained solid. And I think, I'm not someone who always plays the best engine move, but if you're able to make practical decisions in these types of games, that's going to be really important in putting the pressure on your opponent. And I think that's what happened here. And I think that I do have to go back to the basics, because sometimes I do overthink things, where with the capture on d5, any beginner, or even in a bullet game, I would 100% just recapture with the pawn, because, well, you want to always recapture with the pawn, improve your pawn structure, which this does, and gain tempo. And it controls a lot of central squares. So I really need to think about how much I overestimate, first of all, doubled pawns, in that when a pawn captures, the activity that white can gain compensates. And I need to understand that. And then just, I do relatively fine against closed Sicilian games, so I'm always happy when I see this, so I don't think I do poorly in these positions, that I wouldn't do well in the next game if I face this, but I just have to make sure that I round out my ability to face critical moments correctly, and that involves e takes d5. So I really thank you for watching this video. this is a relatively beginner or novel task for me in that I'm not used to making these videos. This is one of the first videos I'm making, but I just want to be able to cover my chess on YouTube and have people watch it, enjoy it, and give feedback. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.